Hey guys, Skydiver Tanner here. So today, I wanted to go over the whole jet fuel is a hoax conspiracy that several people are spouting out there. And props to the debunkers who do a lot of this daily or weekly. I was ready to jump out of an airplane without my skydiving rig on because the amount of stupid in this is just so insane. There's a couple ways that I wanted to go about this video. You know, I thought about maybe showing the height, width, and length of the wings and show how you could do the math to be able to store that amount of fuel in them. But I figured, what's the point of that? Because, you know, you can show math all you want to a lot of these people and they don't care. But I figured I'd give my experience as an airline refueler for 13 years. I strictly only refueled airplanes, and I did that for 13 years, and then I spent 1 year at a small FBO where there as well I fueled aircraft from small little prop planes to turboprops to business jets. But my 13-year job was strictly on the airlines, from like DC-9s to A320s to DC-10s to 747s. So I have plenty of experience with that, and I have plenty of knowledge behind a lot of the fuel systems and how it all works out. First and foremost, I want to explain how a lot of the fueling gets done. There's probably two main ways of fueling an aircraft, right? We all know the tankers out there, and the tankers can range anywhere from like 3,000 gallons all the way up to about 12,000 gallons of fuel. So what you would do is you would take this tanker and you go to a refilling station or port, right? And you literally fill up that tanker. Now, usually on these tankers in the back is a vent for fuel vapors to release, and usually it's pointed down because you don't want any kind of rainwater getting in there or anything. But to kind of help some of these tankers fill up a little bit faster, we'd climb up on top and there's a hatch that you would open up. This would allow the vapor pressure to escape a bit quicker, so you could literally watch the fuel fill up inside the tanker. So you're watching that jet fuel actually physically go inside that tanker. Then you would take the tanker out to an aircraft, and if it was like a 12,000 gallon tanker, you could probably fuel maybe 3 to 4 aircraft here in the US going to kind of like your average destination. Otherwise, maybe like a 747 DC-10, you're going to use that whole tanker, then have to come back, refill it back up. So you can physically watch the fuel filling up inside the tanker. You go out to your aircraft, you put the fuel into it, you leave, you go to refuel it again, you can open up the hatch and see it's empty, and then refuel the tanker again, go back out. The other way of going about this would be a hydrant truck or a hydrant cart. Now I'm going to show some photos throughout this video. You're going to have to excuse them. They're about 15 years old. They are my own personal photos that I have taken while I was a refueler out at Minneapolis St. Paul International Airport. So the quality isn't the best, but they are my own particular photos. So in this photo here, you're going to see a hydrant truck and what it looks like. Now, I'm going to play a video a little bit later of a guy who's trying to find where one of these hydrant trucks or hydrant carts are, and I'll point them out, and they're very obvious. They say Jet A on them in big, a big black sticker with white writing. And what these tankers and trucks were used for was to hook up to underground piping. For airports that have underground fueling, usually there is a fuel farm or area where they hold, have big tanks that hold the jet fuel. And then this is what gets piped underground and gets spread throughout the airport. The airport in which I worked at had 3 massive holding tanks, and they were refilled by a refinery that was close by. Basically what would happen is if the refinery had to shut down, then we had the backup fuel there, or if some sort of reason with the supply happened, we still had plenty of fuel for the aircraft out at the airport. So each gate would have a hydrant there, a fuel hydrant, Some gates would have multiple fuel hydrants because you could park different style airplanes there. So if you have a DC-9 that's relatively short, and then you park a 757 there the next time, a little bit longer and a different location. So you might have 2 to 4 hydrant pits at each gate. And I'm going to show what one of those hydrant pits look like here with the coupler hooked up to it. So what you basically do is you drive your truck out there, or if there's a stationary cart there, you pull out a hose, which is a 3-inch diameter hose, and you hook it up to the hydrant pit using the coupler, and then you use an air sense line. And then you take the hoses on the truck that actually connect to the aircraft, the nozzles, right? And it's basically a lift up and lock it on by doing a turn with it. What happens with these trucks is they're basically merely a filter and a pressure regulator for these aircraft. Basically, an aircraft manifold can only take so much PSI before it starts to ruin the integrity of the aircraft. So these trucks and these carts basically have like surge tanks and stuff on there. So if you close a valve and there's back pressure, the cart or the truck can kind of absorb that backflow and keep it going. You have an air system on there. You plug the airline pigtail at the hydrant pit, and basically it's using air pressure to push down the top of the hydrant. It was spring loaded, and then the fuel could flow by. So that's kind of the general gist of airline refueling. You know, the other thing too is with certain aircraft, if they had an in-up gauge or there was something wrong with the fuel system, you would have to do overwing fueling. Quite literally take a nozzle like what you would do with your car, but much bigger, and open up a fuel cap on the top of the wing and squeeze the handle and watch fuel go into the wing. So you're watching the fuel go into the wing, and usually you calculated it out by also watching the meter. Now, I'll play some clips and kind of explain some things as we go along. This first set of clip that I'm going to play is going to be pointing out those stationary carts. So watch this guy for a bit.
A bunch of planes landing, taking off, and I am looking for a fuel truck anywhere.
So we'll freeze frame and look. Right here's the stationary cart. Right here's a stationary cart. Pretty easy to spot. Let's freeze frame at another point, and you can see the big letters that say Jet A right on these carts. Actually, before we point out where it says Jet A in big bold letters, look right here. You can clearly see a guy using the cart to fuel this aircraft. Now it might be hard to see, but I spot it, no problem. Big black sticker, white letters, Jet A.
This little tiny truck here and this little tiny hose. That's not even a normal size hose that comes from a tanker truck at a gas station.
You're right. It's not the same size as a tanker truck at a gas station. That's gravity fed. They don't need to pump anything. There's no pressure. It just goes into a big tank underground. You don't have to worry about destroying or damaging a pressure manifold for the fuel system. So those hoses definitely are bigger. But that is still a 3-inch diameter hose right there, allowing that aircraft to be fueled 40 PSI, and it looks like it's an Airbus 320, which is probably going to fuel at about 300 gallons per minute.
I'm going to time how long he puts fuel in the wing. Well, holy crap, if I would have known that, I would have just kept filming. It was less than 2 minutes that he put fuel in that plane.
Yes, unfortunately you are right. Maybe it only took 2 minutes. That was some of the problems sometimes with being an airline refueler, is you do a lot of work for very little. Sometimes aircraft come in with fuel still on board, believe it or not. Like I said, all aircraft land with X amount of fuel already on board still, so let's, for an example, say this aircraft landed with 10,000 pounds of fuel on board, and it's going to Las Vegas, which only requires 12,000 pounds of fuel. We do everything in pounds because it is a weight and balance thing between aircraft, and you only put so much fuel on there to get it to its destination, plus maybe an extra half hour to an hour of flight in case that aircraft has to divert for whatever reason. So that means that this fueler probably only needed to put 2,000 pounds of fuel on board. The density of jet fuel on average is 6.7 pounds per gallon, which means if we take that 2,000 pounds and divide it by 6.7, we only need to put on about 300 gallons of fuel. If that cart fuels that aircraft, let's give it a low end of about 150 gallons per minute, only takes about 2 minutes to fuel that aircraft. I don't see the problem here.
So the fuel guy spent more time setting up, putting up a ladder, filling out paperwork, and taking down the ladder, putting back the hose and everything, than he did actually pumping fuel in the wing.
Yep, like I said, sometimes it sucked doing all that work for that. Or sometimes maybe there's something going on and the pilot just wants a fuel increase, like maybe they have to be in a holding pattern for a little bit longer than what was expected. So the pilot might ask for an additional 1,000 pounds of fuel, which it's not a big deal, but it gets him to be able to circle his destination a little bit longer until he's cleared to land. Yes, it sucks having to do all that work for such a little amount of fuel.
Look at that little thing. I'm wondering if it's propane or something. It's weird. All right.
He wonders if it's propane or something. Well, if I remember right, jet fuel is a type of kerosene. And anyways, I'm going to point some things out on this cart. You see two containers right here, and that's that air pressure system that I was telling you about that would hook up to the hydrant pit to create enough PSI to open that hydrant valve to start flowing into the aircraft. Then right here, you see a filter system. Doesn't look very big, doesn't need to be, because a lot of times the fuel is already filtered as it goes into the fuel farm. So that filter just acts as a backup filter for anything that it might gather along the way from being filtered at the fuel farm to the underground pipe before it goes into the aircraft. Then you see some other things here like the hose wind up, and you see a little board, it's kind of facing away, and that's where we read all our pressure sensors. 40 psi is the standard manifold pressure for an aircraft or for an airline aircraft, and then you see other gauges on there as far as like your air pressure, surge pressure, your filter pressure in and your filter pressure out, so that way you can tell if the filter is highly contaminated or not. So very, very unique and basic design at the same time. So now let's move on to the next nut job.
Now here's the 747-400 fuel tank map.
Looks right to me.
And we can see that most of the fuel is stored in the wings. There's a center wing tank as well, obviously, and at the back there's also some fuel, but most of it is stored in the wings. So you are telling me that there's 5 truckloads of jet fuel in this airplane and most of it is in the wings.
That is correct. And despite what many people think, those wings are not paper thin. They're rather thick. Let's show a picture here of some people standing next to a 747, and you can see just at the root of the wing how thick that is in comparison to the person's height. Here's another photo of someone cleaning off one of the flaps on a 747. You can see that the flap usually is quite a bit smaller than the actual wing itself, but you can see the comparison of that guy standing there next to just the flap. That's not even the wing. That's not even where the fuel goes at all. So you can kind of see the thickness of that. Let's pull up one more photo. Here is a section of the wing for an Airbus 320. And I know we're talking about 747s right now, but it's for an Airbus 320. And you can see the thickness of that wing, and you can see right there also that there's a bulkhead for the fuel tank. There's ribs and spars that run up and down the aircraft, basically making it act like a big, huge bridge. So if these people are wondering how it could support all that fuel, well, it's the same way that a bridge can support all the weight of vehicles that go across it. So the fuel gets put in there and it essentially goes around all the ribs and spars, and the bulkheads keep that fuel within that system, and that's why it's called a tank. The tank is not hollow by any means. It still has the ribs and spars that go through it. Here's a photo that I took myself of a 747 refueling panel under the wing. I had to be in a lift that was about 20 feet up in the air to open that panel and to hook the fuel hoses up to. It's really hard to see. Like I said, the quality of this photo is pretty bad because this was taken with, I believe, a Palm Treo phone way back in the day. But we got Reserve 2, Reserve 3, Main 1, Main 4, Main 2, Main 3, the center tank, and the aft tank. The reason why it was Main 2 and 3 and Main 1 and 4 together is because Main 1 is on the outer left wing and Main 4 is on the outer right wing. And they hold the same amount of fuel, so you might as well have those two gauges right next to each other like that. Same with Main 2 and 3. Main 2 is on the inner part of the left wing. Main 3 is on the inner part of the right wing. They hold the same amount of fuel, so they're going to be put on the same gauge. Same with reserves 2 and 3. They're on the very tips of the wings, and therefore they're going to use the same gauge. The center has its own, and then the tail tank also has its own. And then we have a totalizer gauge right here, which I can plug in the amount of fuel that it wants to go on board, and it can basically automatically fuel this airplane for me and close the valves when I need it to be. The other funny thing about this is that tail tank, you could not put fuel in that tail until there was a certain amount of weight in the wings or in the center tank before you put it back there, for reasons of tail tipping. You don't want that aircraft to tail tip. It's not a fun time.
Give me a fucking break. How does that fit here? Can you see that? Now
Look at the
here's
size
a
of
rough
this
illustration
truck.
that I put
It's even
together.
smaller
Here's the
than the truck that we have
747.
seen.
They are
The
telling us
refueler
that 5
it's much smaller in
jet
fact.
fuel
Clearly
is going
wouldn't
onto
hold
the Boeing
5 truckloads
747
of
jet fuel.
Wow, this guy does not know scale at all, does he? You know, the thing is, you put that tanker underneath the wing and it looks pretty darn small underneath that aircraft. And also, you're not putting the entire truck on that airplane. So one, scale is way off. Two, the other thing is that fluid is getting spread throughout all the wings and in the center and in the tail. That's a lot of places to put that fuel. Now, it doesn't take much to fill up a space. You know, you look at a 75-gallon fish tank, like most of you have seen in some of my videos, and that's 75 gallons right there. That's pretty small looking. So you take a 747 center tank and have a big space to put it in, yeah, you're going to get a lot of gallons in it. Let's move on to the last and final video, and then I'll stop boring you guys with this, but I just needed to throw some fun facts and my own personal experiences out there. The next is Flat Earth Fokker on MC Tune. Let's have a watch.
We know that planes, like the skydiving plane, I see it get fueled. Okay, it goes up, it comes down, they use a lot of fuel. It's a different engine, it's a different technology. Yes, they use fuel, and that's why skydiving tickets are what they are. And I watch them fuel the plane every 3 times they go up to altitude. Usually, you get 3 loads, 3 jumpers, it lands, picks up jumpers, goes up, comes, then they have to fuel the fucking plane, all right? And they got to keep the weight down. Now, I'm sure if they were traveling a bit, constantly flying, they could fit a bit more fuel in there.
So you guys probably guessed why I picked this particular clip. So let's go over this. Skydiving airplanes. The reason why they fuel the way they do is because you want to get to altitude as quickly as possible. The faster you can get to altitude, the quicker the skydivers can get out of the airplane, the faster the airplane can get back down and pick up the next load. At the drop zone where I worked and where I jump out of, we fueled the aircraft every single time that it flew a load. And again, this was so then that way it could be the lightest possible while holding the maximum amount of people as possible to get up to altitude as quick as possible so it could get back down as quick as possible. Now that particular aircraft can carry way more fuel than what he is saying. Let's let him talk a little bit more.
Now you're telling me like that's like an hour of flying. Now these commercial airliners are going across the fucking Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. And they're flying at 30 to 40,000 feet. They are not using fuel. I'm sorry, they're just not. The official
What are they
story is
using
fucking
then?
bunk. I told you they're harnessing. My speculation is the evidence points to unverified that they're harnessing electricity from the air.
Why?
Yeah. So they do have some fuel in them for takeoff and flying or at lower altitudes. Once they get up over whatever 20,000 feet or I don't know the number, somewhere above.
You're just making this stuff up.
No, I'm not.
Just
no, I'm not.
making this crap
because
up.
the smaller planes like a Cessna, Kodiak, these skydiving planes can only go so high.
So a Cessna Caravan, which I jump out of, has a service ceiling of 25,000 feet. And a Kodiak has a service ceiling of 25,000 feet. And I know some drop zones that use King Airs. Well, the King Air 350, which probably isn't being used for skydiving, but same style of engine, has a service ceiling of 35,000 feet. That's up where a lot of these airliners go. It's not a different engine. It's still a turbine engine. It's just that it's so small that it turns a prop instead of using the thrust from the engine. But it's still a turbine engine. That's why some of these airplanes, like the Caravan or the Kodiak, can go much higher than 13,000 feet. And the reason why skydivers don't go much higher is because oxygen is required. Now, if the airplane does have supplemental oxygen in there for the skydivers, yeah, they can go much higher. And even then, you don't want to go up much higher because once you remove that supplemental oxygen and you jump out of the airplane, hypoxia could still set in. So we kind of limit how high we go on these aircraft.
So
I wish Skydiver Tanner was in here. He's a skydiver. I went and met him last week. Skydiver Tanner. Yeah, he works at iFly in Minneapolis here.
Yes, MC Toon, I wish I had been there too. Even if it wasn't talking about skydiving, I would have loved to have talked about fueling airplanes. You know, it's kind of why I made this video. A little bit of that. I saw it a while ago, and it bothered me a lot, and then I've seen it again and again, and so I needed to make a video on it. Now, I probably went way more in depth than I needed to on fueling, but I figured that I would explain my personal experience with it, and I'm kind of wondering how these people are going to just shrug it away. At the location I worked, we had 120 airline refuelers on staff. So that's 120 people who all have the same experience as me. That's just that one destination at an airport that's not as big as, say, like O'Hare in Chicago, or even Atlanta Airport, or maybe someplace over in Tokyo, or London Heathrow, where there's probably way more fuelers who have had just the same amount of experience. Now, again, I'm going to throw up some photos just kind of for fun. You know, this is a CRJ getting refueled. Basically, you hook up kind of to the side fuselage, and it gets displaced that way. Then here's an old DC-10 with the two nozzles hooked up to it. This is what the fuel panel looks like on the DC-10. I loved fueling them. They were kind of cool and a little bit of fun. But anyways, people, you know, like I said, I could talk a lot about this. Watching fuel actually go into these airplanes, watching tankers be fueled up. Hell, even if something was going wrong and you fuel too much in there for some reason, or a valve shut, you would see fuel spill out the wing pretty easily. There's so many stories that I have when it comes to airline refueling, as far as things that I've seen and as far as things have been done and stuff like that. One of the other things too is when you pull up to an aircraft, depending on the size of it, it was required that you move the chocks away from the tires by about 3 to 6 inches, because as you put fuel in the aircraft, it would start to settle and the tires would start to flatten out, that if you were to put a full load of fuel on there, it would wedge the chocks down and it would be almost impossible to get them out from underneath the tires. The Airbus 330 which I fueled quite frequently. One of the rules was when you were up in the lift fueling that, you had to keep the top of the lift about 3 to 4 feet away from the bottom of the wing, because that aircraft, the way the landing gear is set up, when it would settle, it would drop quite a bit. And fueling an Airbus 330 for the very first time was quite scary, because all of a sudden you just hear a loud bang when the strut starts to kind of release a little bit and settle, and you watch the whole wing kind of flex and bend as that happens. Same with the 747. You could go out and you could look at the strut, and you could probably have about 2 feet of space of the chrome, and when you're all done, you might have only about 3 to 4 inches of chrome showing on that strut there. So it was kind of fun to watch how some of those worked and how it came about. The other really nice thing is, like on really hot summer days, as you were fueling the aircraft, the fuel was much cooler. And so as it would fill the wing up, you could start to put your arm or maybe the top of your head, or if it was a low enough aircraft, you put your back up against it and you could feel the coolness of the fuel through the underside of the wing. And it was kind of refreshing, and we all enjoyed that. But yes, there's so many stories that I could tell. There's so many things that I've seen happen, and there's definitely fuel going in there. And if you want to deny people's experiences, then that's your issue. Anyways, guys, I know this video went a lot longer than it should have, but I just really need to get a lot of things off my chest. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification. Otherwise, please hit that like button if you like this video. Also, there's a bunch of links down in the description if you'd like to contribute to this channel at all. And also leave a comment. What are your guys' thoughts? What do you think about all this? Anyways, I'm going to talk to you guys later. I'm going to go take some more ibuprofen or something to help my head, because this was a lot of stupid. Talk to y'all later. Love and light.